A simple black woman, dressed in casual attire, was being escorted out of an upscale boutique by a manager in a sharp suit, his demeanor full of contempt. Whispers quickly filled the air as nearby customers stared at her with judgmental curiosity. He sneered, his voice dripping with prejudice. "People like you don't belong here." She silently walked out onto the sidewalk, her head held high, maintaining her dignity despite the humiliation. An hour later, a sleek black Rolls-Royce with tinted windows slowly pulled up in front of the store. Her billionaire husband, Michael Johnson, stepped out. Adjusting his designer tie, his cold gaze fixed on the store's entrance as he walked toward it with purpose. Amid the flashy stores and wealthy customers, Sarah Johnson, a simple 45-year-old black woman, walked calmly along the crowded sidewalk. Her appearance was composed, her kind face reflecting the grace and simplicity she embodied. Sarah wore a plain white t-shirt, light gray joggers, and comfortable sneakers, in stark contrast to the lavish surroundings. Sarah Johnson was no stranger to a life of luxury. Her husband, Michael Johnson, was one of the most powerful and successful billionaires in California. However, Sarah had always chosen a humble, simple lifestyle, rejecting society's expectations of a rich man's wife. She cherished the humble, loved the sincere, and preferred not to impress others with expensive clothes. Today was a special day for Sarah. In just a few days, it would be Michael's 48th birthday, the man she loved most. After 20 years together, Sarah knew Michael lacked for nothing in terms of expensive possessions. What he valued most were gifts with deep meaning. Therefore, she had decided to personally select a gift that was truly meaningful, something special enough to fully express her love and sincerity for him. She gently paused before the luxurious store called Elegance Boutique, her gaze drawn to a precious antique watch displayed delicately in a glass case, glowing under the store's lights. A 1960s vintage watch, one of only 5 in the entire world. Michael had always been passionate about collecting historically significant items, and Sarah was certain this gift would touch his heart. Sarah gazed at the watch and smiled gently. She took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself to step inside the store. Little did she know, this ordinary shopping trip would quickly turn into a major challenge, thrusting her into a tense, dramatic confrontation where she would have to fight for her own dignity and self-respect. Gently pushing open the heavy glass door of Elegance Boutique, Sarah stepped into the cool, fragrant air, filled with the scent of high-end perfumes. Immediately, the soft chime of the door rang, signaling a new arrival, but the response within the store was anything but welcoming. The cheerful conversation suddenly stopped, and the eyes of both the staff and customers shifted toward Sarah, eyes full of skepticism, mixed with a touch of uncomfortable curiosity, as if she had just broken some unspoken rule in this place. Sarah noticed it immediately, but she was too accustomed to such looks in her life. She kept a composed expression, calmly walking deeper into the store, heading toward the glass display case showcasing the store's most precious jewelry and watches. Her gaze settled exactly on the vintage watch she had already chosen, the classic, refined timepiece resting on smooth black velvet, as though waiting for her to come. From behind the counter, Ashley, a young saleswoman with neat blonde hair, a black dress that was both elegant and cold, watched Sarah with a scrutinizing gaze. Ashley was a young woman raised in the luxury of Beverly Hills, always proud of her ability to judge people based on their attire and appearance. To Ashley, every customer who walked into Elegance Boutique was silently evaluated from the moment they entered the store. But today, in front of her stood a simple black woman, far removed from the typical clientele Ashley served daily. Ashley hesitated for a long moment before reluctantly stepping out from behind the counter, her high heels clicking sharply on the white marble floor. She deliberately kept her distance from Sarah, folding her arms across her chest in a stance that was polite but unmistakably cold. Clearing her throat softly, she asked with a polite tone, tinged with barely concealed sarcasm, "Hello, may I help you with something?" Sarah looked up and caught Ashley's cold, scrutinizing gaze, taking in the simple, neatly tied curls of her hair and the casual sportswear she wore. It wasn't hard for Sarah to realize she was being judged, but she decided to let it slide. Calmly, she replied, "Yes, I'm interested in the vintage watch displayed. Could I please see it?" Ashley was momentarily taken aback when Sarah mentioned the $85,000 item with such ease, as though it were just another common object. Her gaze instantly grew more doubtful, her eyebrows raised in suspicion, her voice dripping with skepticism. "That watch is one of the most expensive items in our store. Are you sure you want to see it?" Sarah nodded politely, clear and composed. "Yes, I'm sure I'd like to see it." Ashley hesitated slightly, but then reluctantly took the key from her pocket, moving toward the display case with exaggerated caution, as if worried Sarah might damage or even steal the valuable item. Ashley's eyes still held on to her skeptical and wary attitude, making the atmosphere around them grow even more tense. Inside the store, a few curious customers stole glances at Sarah and Ashley, beginning to whisper quietly, offering their own cautious judgments. Those probing eyes seemed to unintentionally create an invisible barrier between Sarah and the glamorous, opulent world around her. Sarah could feel the discomfort slowly creeping into her heart. She silently thought to herself, perhaps today wouldn't just be an ordinary shopping trip. Little did she know, what she was experiencing was merely the beginning of a tense showdown, where her self-respect, dignity, and sense of justice would soon be put to the ultimate test. When Ashley placed the vintage watch on the glass counter, her gesture was both cautious and clearly cold. Sarah immediately sensed the reluctance and disrespect in every little motion from the young saleswoman. Ashley carefully placed the watch down, but her eyes still held a look of skepticism, even a touch of disdain as they focused on Sarah. "This is a vintage watch from the 1960s. Only 5 were made worldwide," Ashley said in a soft tone, but with an air of arrogance, as if she believed this information would make Sarah back down immediately. Sarah bent down to carefully examine the watch, her eyes lighting up with appreciation. She had done her research on this timepiece, fully understanding its value and history. For a moment, Sarah imagined Michael opening the gift box and seeing this precious item. It would surely be a beautiful and meaningful memory for him. "It's truly beautiful," Sarah said softly, her voice gentle but firm. "I'd like to buy it." Ashley paused for a moment, clearly surprised by Sarah's confident statement. Her eyes widened slightly, but then quickly shifted to a deeper level of skepticism. Ashley tilted her head, briefly glancing at Sarah's simple attire before responding with polite, yet pointed words. "This watch costs $85,000. Perhaps I should recommend some other watches, ones more suited to your budget." The slyly veiled insinuation in Ashley's words felt like an invisible knife cutting at Sarah's self-respect. But she knew this wasn't the first time someone had judged her based on her appearance, and certainly not the last. Sarah calmly raised her head, meeting Ashley's gaze with confidence and poise. "Thank you, but I've thought this through. I'd like to purchase this watch. Please assist me in completing the transaction." Ashley couldn't hide the slight irritation that flashed across her beautiful but cold face. To this young saleswoman, Sarah's firm resolve was clearly frustrating. To Ashley, the woman before her was clearly not the type of customer she was used to dealing with at Elegance Boutique. Ashley quickly cast a glance at the store manager, Richard Harris, as a silent plea for assistance. Richard, standing not far away, observed the situation with his sharp and calm eyes. In his early 40s, Richard was elegant with salt and pepper hair, tall stature, and always dressed in expensive suits. He was known for being very discerning, taking pride in his ability to identify truly valuable customers with a single glance. Receiving Ashley's meaningful look, Richard walked over with a smile, but one that carried an unmistakable coldness. He politely greeted Sarah, but his gaze was laced with arrogance. "Good afternoon, madam. I'm Richard Harris, the store manager. Is there an issue I can assist you with?" Richard's voice was gentle, but there was a clear note of scrutiny. Sarah looked up at Richard, maintaining her calm composure. "I'm trying to purchase this watch, but it seems your staff feels I'm not suitable for this item." Richard let out a light laugh, his smile never reaching his eyes, then replied in a courteous yet sharp tone that sent a chill through the air. "We just want to ensure our customers choose items that match their financial means. I'm sure you understand, we frequently serve special customers. Therefore, we are always cautious with every transaction." Sarah could clearly hear the carefully chosen words, still laced with hidden meaning. She understood that by special customers, Richard was referring to wealthy white individuals, not someone like her. A sense of discomfort crept into Sarah's heart, but she knew this was the moment where she needed to stay calm and focused more than ever. "I understand your point," Sarah replied softly, but with unwavering determination. "But as I told your staff, I've decided to buy this watch. I hope we can complete the transaction soon." Richard didn't respond immediately. It seemed he was weighing something in his mind. His eyes narrowed slightly, and a cold, calculating look flashed across his face as if he had just made a decision on how to deal with Sarah. Sarah clearly recognized that the challenge she was facing had only just begun. In that moment, she knew that standing firm against these deep-seated prejudices wouldn't be easy, but it was the defining moment to prove that a person's dignity could not be judged by appearances alone. Richard slightly tilted his head, his sharp gaze unwavering, but the fake smile slowly faded, replaced by a stern expression tinged with obvious arrogance. He stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Sarah as if to emphasize his position of power, his voice cold and condescending, reverberating through the once elegant but now stifling atmosphere of the boutique. "I'm afraid, but I will need you to provide proof of your ability to pay before we continue this transaction." Sarah met Richard's gaze, unwavering, her voice soft but incredibly clear. "I've never had to prove my financial capability when making a purchase. I believe that should be no different here." Richard smirked slightly, a smile laced with mockery, his eyes quickly scanning Sarah, from her simple sneakers to her plain white t-shirt, evaluating her like an unworthy item not meant to be displayed in his high-end store. He raised his chin, his cold, sharp gaze returning to Sarah as he responded with a clear tone, full of contempt. "This store is not for people like you. This is not a place for you to try things on or take photos to show off. If you can't prove your ability to pay, please leave and avoid causing inconvenience to the other customers." The words struck hard, each one seemingly meant to carve deep into Sarah's self-respect, causing the nearby customers to turn, curiously glancing at the two with mixed expressions of awkwardness and subtle amusement. Whispers started to spread, only amplifying the tension in the already quiet Elegance boutique. Sarah clenched her hands gently at her sides, maintaining a calm expression despite her heart racing with anger and deep hurt from the blatant racism she was facing. However, she knew this was not the time to lose control. She needed to remain calm, composed, and dignified as she faced the prejudices that Richard and the store were projecting onto her. She took a slow breath, holding Richard's gaze, and responded, "I believe that what I wear or how I look should never be the basis of you judging my financial ability or my worth. I'm here to make a purchase, not to be judged by you or anyone else." Richard was momentarily surprised by Sarah's directness. He was accustomed to customers quietly leaving when confronted with such situations, but the woman in front of him, firm and polite yet full of self-respect, made him feel like he was being challenged head-on. Richard immediately felt his own pride being insulted, and his gaze turned colder, his voice now tinged with impatience. "Madam, our store serves special customers. I'm merely doing my duty to protect the reputation of Elegance Boutique. If you're uncomfortable with that, the door is right there." Ashley, standing beside Richard, couldn't hide the faint, mocking smile that crept onto her lips. To her, Sarah's presence here was already an annoyance, and Richard's strong response seemed to be venting her frustrations for her. Sarah briefly scanned the store, the curious glances, the hushed whispers. Everyone was waiting to see how she would react, but Sarah remained unshaken. She kept her calm expression and softly replied, "I didn't come here to seek attention, nor do I wish to argue with you. I simply want to complete my transaction. If you are rejecting me simply because my appearance does not meet your standards, then the problem lies with you, not me." Richard's eyes darkened, and he gritted his teeth as he struggled to suppress the growing anger inside him. But beneath his cold arrogance, there was a resolute determination to not let anyone shake the deeply ingrained class prejudices that shaped his beliefs. Richard decided to end this uncomfortable conversation with a final, decisive tone, lowering his voice to a sharp, cutting command. "Either you provide financial proof right now, or I ask you to leave. We don't have time to deal with people who aren't serious." His voice rang out coldly, filled with threat, making the atmosphere more tense than ever before. In that moment, Sarah realized that she wasn't just facing disdain anymore. This was a moment where she had to decide whether to stand firm or walk away in the humiliation and shame Richard was trying to impose on her. But no matter what, she wouldn't let this injustice and prejudice win so easily. The atmosphere in the store had become suffocatingly tense. Richard's words were like a spark that immediately ignited a wave of whispers among the surrounding customers. Curious, judgmental glances intensified, now focused on Sarah. The once spacious Elegance Boutique now felt cramped, closing in on Sarah with an oppressive, chilling atmosphere. Richard, feeling as though his authority was being challenged, grew even more aggressive. He leaned slightly forward, his cold, piercing eyes locked on Sarah, pressing her with the weight of his gaze. His voice rang out clearly and coldly, each word deliberately meant for everyone in the store to hear. "Madam, I'm far too familiar with people like you. Those who come here just to snap a few pictures and post them on social media, pretending to live a wealthy lifestyle they don't actually have. Elegance Boutique is not a place for you to live in fantasy." Sarah felt each of Richard's words as invisible cuts, intentionally designed to wound her in front of everyone. Her gaze faltered for a moment, but then she quickly regained her composure, lifted her head high, and responded with a voice strong and clear. "I came here to make a purchase. I don't know why you think it's your right to judge me, but I won't accept this insult." Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly irritated by Sarah's resilient reaction. Deep inside, his pride in his position at the store and his belief in his ability to judge customers had never been shaken so violently. Richard decided to escalate the tension further, believing that this would make Sarah quickly surrender and leave the store. He lowered his voice, but made sure each word was sharp and full of contempt. If you really want to prove you're not just pretending, you'll provide proof of your financial ability now, or please leave the store immediately. I don't have time to waste on these pointless games. Ashley stood beside Richard, arms crossed over her chest, a faint mocking smile on her face as she watched Richard handle the situation with force. To this young woman, people like Sarah were never meant to be in the place where she worked. Sarah quietly looked around, noticing the curious eyes of the customers, waiting to see how she would react. The whispers grew louder, laced with a mix of amusement and cold curiosity. Some people even took out their phones, ready to document the unfolding scene as entertainment. A sense of shame and anger surged within Sarah, but she knew she couldn't let her emotions take over. This was no longer just a personal issue. It was a matter of dignity and fairness. Sarah took a deep breath, regaining her calm. Her voice was gentle but decisive. I came here to buy a watch, not to prove anything to you or anyone else, but I understand you've decided to refuse me based solely on your own appearance-based prejudice. I never imagined a place that claims to be professional and upscale would treat customers with such disrespect. Richard frowned, visibly displeased. He hadn't expected the woman before him to remain so firm and strong despite all his attempts to pressure her. This made him feel embarrassed in front of his staff and customers. He stepped forward, reaching out as if to direct Sarah toward the door, his voice cold and commanding. I won't argue with you any longer. This is your last chance to leave the store on your own. Don't make me call security. Richard's gaze was filled with threat and coldness, his arrogance and disdain unmistakable. The surrounding customers fell silent, anxiously waiting for Sarah's next move. The store was eerily quiet, the atmosphere frozen as if no one dared to breathe. Sarah stood still for a moment, her eyes filled with disappointment but maintaining her dignity. She didn't say anything more, but deep inside, she had made her decision. She would not easily give up the fight against the injustice and prejudice that Richard and this store were trying to impose on her. With a quiet grace, Sarah took a step back, evading Richard's outstretched hand with quiet pride. Though the situation seemed unfavorable, she knew the battle wasn't over, and she would find justice for herself. Before Sarah could take a step back with pride, Richard suddenly rushed toward her, his large hand gripping her arm with such force that it made her flinch. No longer courteous or polite, he shoved her out the door with blatant brutality, causing the surrounding customers to recoil in surprise. Richard raised his voice deliberately, his words harsh and biting, echoing through the boutique, cruel and merciless enough for everyone to hear clearly. We don't serve people like you. Go down to the cheap store on the street where you belong. Richard's words felt like a cold knife, deeply cutting into Sarah's dignity and self-worth. In that moment, her heart seemed to seize from the open and blatant humiliation. She stood frozen at the door, the bright sunlight outside suddenly blinding in a hateful way. All eyes from inside the store, from customers to staff, were on her, looking at her as if she were a stranger, an intruder in a world they were sure she would never belong to. Inside the store, Ashley and a few other young employees stood by Richard, stifling smirks filled with mockery. Ashley didn't even try to hide the clear satisfaction on her beautiful but cold face. To them, seeing Sarah thrown out of the store was a small victory, a satisfying moment that reinforced their misguided belief that their position at Elegance Boutique was above anyone who didn't meet their self-imposed standards of luxury. Sarah stood alone on Rodeo Drive, overwhelmed by a surge of confusion and hurt. Her eyes briefly flashed with anger, frustration, and a deep pain at this blatant injustice. She tried to take a deep breath to calm herself, but the emotions flooding her were so strong that her hands trembled slightly. She had never endured such open and brutal racism before. For years, she had lived a quiet, humble life, always respecting others and rarely placing importance on status or wealth. But today, simply because of her skin color and modest clothing, she had been subjected to the most painful humiliation, right in the middle of a public street filled with people. She turned her head to look back, her gaze passing through the glass windows of Elegance Boutique, cutting through the mocking, laughing faces of Richard, Ashley, and the others still standing inside. They were whispering to each other, their expressions full of smug satisfaction, as if they had just completed a mission to protect the boutique's class. In that moment, Sarah felt everything around her become colder and more alien than ever before. A lump rose in her throat, but deep within her heart, she knew this would not be the end. People like Richard and Ashley needed to witness that human value should never be measured by appearance, by skin color, or by the narrow-minded prejudices they had created for themselves. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes regaining their strength. She calmly adjusted her attire, lifting her head high as she walked down the crowded street. She understood that the journey to reclaim her justice and dignity would be long and full of challenges, but Sarah was determined that she would never let this insult and inhumane discrimination win. As Sarah turned to walk away, trying to escape the probing eyes and cruel whispers from Elegance Boutique, a soft voice suddenly called out from behind her, breaking the suffocating grip on her mind. "Excuse me, are you okay?" Sarah turned around, slightly surprised to see Emily Carter, the famous actress known for her friendly smile and sincere blue eyes, standing in front of her. Emily had witnessed the entire scene from inside the store, her face now expressing deep sympathy, mixed with genuine sadness. Sarah hesitated for a second, but then she managed a gentle, polite smile and replied, "I'm fine. Thank you for your concern." Emily gently placed her hand on Sarah's shoulder, her eyes full of sincerity and seriousness. She turned her gaze back toward the store, where Richard and the staff were still standing, looking out with their arrogant, cold demeanor. Emily shook her head in disbelief, her voice clear but filled with true emotion. "I just saw everything that happened in there. The way they treated you is absolutely unacceptable. No one should have to endure such blatant insults and racism." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her heart. Emily's words and attitude made her realize that kindness and humanity still existed somewhere around her, even amidst a day filled with painful experiences. Sarah gently placed her hand on Emily's, responding with a calm voice, but one full of sincerity. "Thank you, Emily. I really appreciate that you understand and empathize. This means so much to me right now." Emily squeezed Sarah's hand slightly, her eyes showing a flicker of emotion. As someone who often faced society's judgments and pressures, Emily understood the pain and loneliness of being judged or treated unfairly simply because of one's appearance or skin color. She looked deep into Sarah's eyes and said softly, "You don't deserve to be treated like that. No one does. I'm truly sorry you had to go through this." A few steps away, Richard and Ashley were still watching, their curiosity mixed with some confusion, as they saw Sarah being comforted by a famous person like Emily Carter. This was clearly not part of their plan. Richard furrowed his brow, a tense expression flickering as he realized the image of the store and his own reputation could be negatively affected by what had just occurred. Sarah felt their gaze, but she no longer wanted to pay attention to their mockery or judgment. At that moment, beside her stood a complete stranger, someone willing to stand up, comfort her and offer genuine support. That was worth more than anything Sarah could have imagined right now. "What are you planning to do next?" Emily asked, her voice filled with genuine care and concern. Sarah looked toward the store one last time, her gaze becoming deeper and more resolute than ever before. She sighed softly, but immediately regained the strength and dignity she had always strived to maintain. "I won't let this injustice slide easily," Sarah replied gently, each word carrying inner strength. "Not for me, but for others who may have already or will go through something like this. But first, I think I need to calm down a bit." Emily smiled warmly, nodding in agreement. "I understand. Whatever you decide to do, just remember you're not alone. I'm always here to help if you need it." Sarah looked at Emily with deep gratitude. The unexpected encounter and the compassion from this famous woman were a source of encouragement, helping Sarah regain the confidence to move forward. Her heart was filled with determination, and she promised herself that she would never let people like Richard and Ashley continue to hurt or humiliate anyone else again. As Sarah and Emily were talking, trying to find a moment of peace amidst the noise and chaos on Rodeo Drive, a luxurious black Rolls-Royce with tinted windows slowly came to a stop right in front of Elegance Boutique. The car immediately drew the attention of everyone present, including Richard and the staff, who were still watching the scene outside with a mix of smugness and curiosity. The car door opened, and Michael Johnson stepped out calmly, every movement radiating confidence and authority without the need for any introduction. His perfectly tailored navy blue suit fit his tall, athletic frame, emphasizing the powerful aura that was familiar to those in the business world. His sharp gaze and serious expression quickly scanned the store, as if evaluating the situation, looking for the reason why Sarah hadn't returned to the car as planned. At that moment, a woman in her 50s, with neatly styled, silver-streaked brown hair, stepped out of the store. Immediately recognizing the powerful man as Michael Johnson, the billionaire frequently featured in economic reports and current affairs magazines, she quickly walked toward him, her face filled with concern and empathy. "Excuse me, Mr. Johnson," the woman spoke softly but with seriousness. "I just witnessed what happened with your wife. They treated her very poorly." Michael furrowed his brow, his expression instantly becoming more serious. The calm demeanor that was usually on his face shifted to one of cold vigilance, but still exuding authority. He turned his gaze toward the woman in front of him, polite yet firm. "Could you please elaborate?" The woman hesitated for a moment, but then quickly recounted the entire incident involving Sarah. Her voice was soft but filled with frustration, unable to hide her anger at the blatant racism and disrespect from Richard and the staff at Elegance Boutique. She ended her story with a heartfelt emphasis. "I truly apologize for having to tell you this, but I couldn't stay silent. No one deserves to go through that, especially someone like Mrs. Johnson." Michael listened intently, his face unchanged, but his eyes grew even colder and sharper with each word. He nodded politely, his voice calm yet resolute. "Thank you for telling me. I will handle this immediately." As the woman stepped back, Michael turned his head and fixed his gaze directly on Elegance Boutique, where Richard and the staff were still watching him with a mix of curiosity and a bit of hesitation, now realizing that the man in front of the store was none other than the powerful figure they usually saw in the press or on television. Michael's eyes met Richard's, and through the shiny glass, he seemed to immediately understand the situation and the consequences of his arrogance. Richard nervously swallowed. For the first time that day, the smug confidence on his face completely disappeared, replaced by a rare sense of panic and confusion. Michael slowly turned toward Sarah, who was standing with Emily, and gently approached them. When Sarah saw her husband walking toward her, the tension in her heart was replaced by a feeling of comfort and strength. Emily stood beside Sarah, giving her a subtle, meaningful smile, as if to say that Sarah was no longer alone. Once Michael stood next to his wife, he gently placed his hand on her shoulder, his voice soft but resolute. "I know what happened. Are you okay?" Sarah looked up at him, her eyes full of gratitude, and replied softly, "I'm fine, Michael, just a little disappointed." Michael gently squeezed Sarah's hand, his gaze now fixed firmly on the store, with clear determination and coldness. He spoke quietly, each word heavy with meaning. "Don't worry. I won't let this go easily. They need to understand that no one has the right to insult or discriminate against others like this." Sarah silently nodded, her heart much lighter, knowing that the justice she was seeking would soon be served by the man she trusted and loved most. She understood that the fight against prejudice and injustice was not just hers, but for everyone who had ever suffered like she had. And Sarah believed that together, they would deliver a valuable lesson to Elegance Boutique and people like Richard. Michael gently removed his hand from Sarah's shoulder, then, with calm authority, he turned and walked directly toward the Elegance Boutique. The moment Michael entered, the atmosphere inside the store changed completely. The eyes that had been filled with mockery and arrogance only moments before shifted to cautiousness, even tinged with fear. Richard, standing near the glass door, turned pale when he saw the famous billionaire enter the store with an aura of authority. Immediately, Richard tried to regain his usual professional demeanor, rushing to greet Michael with a forced smile. But before he could get close, he froze in his tracks, his face draining of color as he realized that Sarah, calm and composed, was walking in behind Michael. She held her head high, unfazed by the confused, tense looks from the staff and customers present. Richard stumbled slightly, clearing his throat as he tried to hide his discomfort, failing miserably. He spoke with a shaky, fearful voice. "Welcome to Elegance Boutique, Mr. Johnson. I wonder if there's anything I can assist you with." Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he silently studied Richard for a long moment with a sharp gaze, as if measuring the sincerity in his words and demeanor. The tension in the store had reached its peak. The staff around them were utterly silent, and even Ashley had her head lowered, her once confident posture completely gone. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice cold and calm, yet terrifyingly composed. "I've just been informed that my wife was insulted, discriminated against, and thrown out of this store. Can you explain this, Mr. Harris?" Richard flinched at Michael's direct and sharp question, attempting to avoid his authoritative gaze, but it was futile. He stammered, trying to justify himself clumsily. "Mr. Johnson, I believe this is an unfortunate misunderstanding. We've always been very respectful of our customers." Michael immediately cut him off, his voice icy as he refused to let Richard continue his evasive speech. "The respect you're talking about is how you grabbed my wife's arm and shoved her out the door in front of everyone. Or was it the derogatory, discriminatory remarks you made?" The question rang out like a clarion call, causing all eyes in the store to turn toward Richard with judgment. Richard's face went pale, and he tried to avoid the gazes of everyone, his lips moving but unable to utter a word. Meanwhile, Ashley and a few other employees behind Richard stood frozen, too afraid to even breathe. Michael took another step forward, his voice maintaining its calm, but now carrying an even more forceful and decisive edge. "I want a clear explanation, Mr. Harris. Does Elegance Boutique have a policy of treating customers differently based on their skin color or attire? Or is this a standard you've set for yourself?" Richard was in a panic, hastily waving his hands, his voice trembling and growing quieter. "Mr. Johnson, I didn't mean that. I was just doing my job to protect the store's image." "Protect the store's image?" Michael repeated Richard's words with a cold, mocking tone. "You think insulting and discriminating against customers is how you protect the image of elegance? That's shameful, Mr. Harris." Richard's face was now as white as a sheet, sweat dripping down his forehead. He couldn't muster a single word in response to Michael's strong, authoritative words. Inside, he was filled with panic and fear, realizing the severe consequences of his thoughtless and blatant racism. Michael turned toward Sarah, his voice softening with concern. "Sarah, I want you to point out the person who insulted you the most here." Sarah looked toward Richard and Ashley, then gently responded in a clear, dignified voice. "It was Mr. Harris, the store manager, who insulted me and threw me out. And that girl, Ashley, mocked and disrespected me from the very beginning." Michael fixed his stern, cold gaze on the two individuals Sarah had pointed out, causing them to immediately lower their heads in shame. "I hope you both understand the consequences of your actions today," Michael said, his voice lowering, each word full of weight and authority. "And I assure you, this will not just pass by as you think." The store became eerily quiet after Michael's declaration. Richard and Ashley stood frozen, filled with regret, but it was too late to change anything. They now understood that they had made a grave mistake, and the man standing before them, Michael Johnson, would never let this slide easily. Michael's words immediately plunged the store into a terrifying silence. Richard felt as if his breath had frozen in his throat. He stood there, his body stiff, his face turning even paler as he noticed Michael's cold, authoritative gaze directed at him. Michael's eyes, deep and sharp, gave no hint of mercy, only fierce determination. Michael slowly took another step toward Richard, his voice steady and resonant, echoing throughout the store, each word like a hammer strike, heavy with meaning. "There's something important I think you need to know, Mr. Harris. My investment firm, MJ Capital, has just completed the acquisition of a significant portion of the parent company that owns the Elegance Boutique chain, and officially, as of today, I am the real owner of this store." The store immediately fell into stunned silence. Every eye, from customers to staff, was fixed on Richard, who stood frozen as if turned to stone, his face completely transformed. It was a mixture of fear, panic, and utter shock. He had never imagined that his arrogance and disrespect toward a customer would lead to such serious and unexpected consequences. Richard tried to speak, but his words caught in his throat, unable to escape from his dry mouth. Cold sweat began to bead on his forehead and temples. The other staff members in the store, including Ashley, stood motionless, their faces blank with fear and disbelief at Michael's bombshell revelation. Michael remained standing, his gaze filled with authority and resolve, silently observing Richard's reaction as if holding total control over the situation. His voice continued, soft yet powerful, enough for everyone in the store to feel the weight of each word he spoke. "Your actions today, Mr. Harris, not only violate basic ethical standards but also go against every value that I and my firm stand for. No employee under my management is allowed to discriminate against customers based on their appearance, skin color, or status." Richard swallowed hard, his breath quickening, feeling as if he wanted to step back but found himself paralyzed, his legs trembling under the weight of Michael's gaze. Richard's voice cracked as he spoke, weak and lacking confidence. "Mr. Johnson, I didn't know about this. Had I known, I would have acted differently." Michael coldly interrupted Richard, his voice leaving no room for excuses. "No, Mr. Harris, you should have treated every customer with respect from the beginning, not waited until you discovered their true identity to adjust your attitude. That clearly shows the hypocrisy and insincerity I will never accept." Michael's sharp words felt like a cold sentence for Richard. The atmosphere in the store became heavier than ever before, and everyone present understood that Richard's fate, as well as the store's future, now rested entirely in the hands of the powerful man before them. Michael turned to Sarah, his gaze softening with love and respect, a stark contrast to the coldness with which he had looked at Richard. "Sarah, I'm so sorry you had to go through this, but I will make sure no one else has to endure what you did today." Sarah nodded gently, her eyes filled with trust and gratitude for her husband, who was always ready to stand up for dignity and justice. Not just for her, but for all those who had been discriminated against as she had. As for Richard, he stood silently, lost in despair and fear, fully aware that from this moment on, his life would never be the same. His mistake could no longer be corrected, and he would now face the serious consequences of his arrogance and blatant racism. The silence in the store once again enveloped the space as Michael gently turned back toward Richard, his sharp, decisive gaze as if reading every thought in Richard's mind. Richard stood motionless, trying to regain some composure but failing. He had no choice but to accept that he had made a serious mistake, a mistake that could not easily be overlooked. Michael spoke, calm but powerful, his voice resonating clearly so that everyone in the store could hear. "Mr. Harris, I want you to publicly apologize to my wife right here, in front of all the staff and customers present." Richard's eyes widened in shock, his face showing clear confusion and hesitation. For a man so confident, even arrogant, the idea of publicly apologizing in front of an audience was incredibly difficult and humiliating. But he also understood that if he refused or hesitated, the consequences would be far worse. Richard took a deep breath and nervously walked toward Sarah, each step heavy with reluctance. He tried to avoid Michael's intense gaze, as well as the curious, scrutinizing eyes of the customers watching closely. Standing in front of Sarah, he lowered his head slightly, his voice trying to remain calm but still trembling. "Mrs. Johnson, I sincerely apologize for what I just did. I was wrong to insult you and treat you unfairly like that." Michael immediately interrupted Richard, his voice firm and clear, emphasizing each word he spoke. "Mr. Harris, I want you to understand that you are apologizing to Sarah not because she is my wife or because of her status. You are apologizing because she deserves to be treated with the respect of a human being, something you failed to provide." Those words rang out as a strong reminder to everyone present, making the atmosphere in the store more solemn and profound than ever before. The customers and staff who witnessed the moment nodded in agreement, understanding that this was not just an apology. It was a valuable lesson in respect and human dignity. Richard's face turned pale, but he had no choice but to lower his head even further, his voice now softer, carrying a genuine remorse. "I understand now, Mr. Johnson. Mrs. Johnson, once again, I sincerely apologize for disrespecting you. I truly regret my actions." Sarah stood tall, her gaze calm and resolute as she looked at Richard. She gently responded to his apology in a voice that was soft, but sharp and clear. "I hope you truly understand that human value does not lie in appearance or skin color. I hope that after today, you will never treat anyone else the way you treated me." Richard nodded slightly, his face now full of shame and late regret. The other staff members, especially Ashley, looked down at the floor, too afraid to meet Michael's sharp and authoritative gaze. The costly lesson they had just witnessed made them more aware than ever of the consequences of discrimination and prejudice, whether it was done unknowingly or intentionally. Michael gently placed his hand on Sarah's shoulder, his gaze softening as he looked at her. She looked up at him, their eyes meeting with affection, an unspoken commitment that justice and fairness must always be protected, no matter who is being wronged. The atmosphere in the store relaxed slightly, but the echoes of what had just happened still reverberated strongly in the hearts of everyone present. This was a serious wake-up call, not just for Richard and Elegance Boutique, but for everyone, that the dignity and self-respect of a person are sacred and should never be violated or taken lightly. The air in the store remained heavy with emotion after Richard's apology, and Michael slowly turned back to face him, his gaze sharp and resolute, as if reading every thought in Richard's mind. Richard stood motionless, trying to regain some composure, but he could not. He had no choice but to accept that he had made a serious mistake, a mistake that could not easily be overlooked. Michael spoke clearly, his voice steady but powerful, ensuring that everyone in the store could hear each word. "Mr. Harris, I will give you two options. 1, you can resign immediately and leave this store today. 2, you will attend a mandatory training on anti-racism and customer equality, a topic that clearly you are lacking in." Richard immediately looked up, his face showing shock at the options presented. Both choices were incredibly difficult and bitter for him. For someone who had always held pride and arrogance above all else, resigning on the spot would be a huge personal failure and humiliation. However, accepting a training session supervised by Sarah made him feel even more uncomfortable, as it meant he would have to face the woman he had disrespected and insulted just moments before. Michael seemed to read the hesitation in Richard's eyes, and he continued to press, his voice cold yet heavy with authority. "Oh, and there's one more thing you need to know. My wife, Mrs. Sarah Johnson, will be the one overseeing this training. The same person you insulted today. I want you to understand that this is not just a punishment but an opportunity for you to truly learn and change." Richard instinctively felt his heart tighten at this revelation. He lowered his head, his mind swirling with chaotic thoughts. He never imagined that one day he would have to face such significant consequences for actions he had always considered trivial and normal. Actions that had been based on his prejudice and disrespect for others. The silence in the store stretched on, each second seeming to last an eternity. Customers and employees alike were watching Richard, waiting for his response and decision. Richard finally took a deep breath, his voice hoarse but sincere, yet weak as it broke through the quiet space. I accept the training. I sincerely apologize for the harm I've caused. I will do my best to change." With that, Richard bowed his head even lower, trying to avoid making eye contact with Michael and Sarah. This decision was bitter for him, but it was the first time Richard had truly realized the consequences of the discrimination he had previously ignored. Sarah looked at Richard slowly, her face unreadable, but deep inside, she understood that this was an opportunity for real change. Not just for Richard, but for everyone in the store and society at large. Michael nodded gently, satisfied with Richard's decision. His voice rang out once more, softer but still commanding. "Good, Mr. Harris. I hope you truly realize that accepting this training is not just for your own benefit, but for the people you will interact with in the future. We will begin next week, and I want you to know that I will be closely monitoring your progress." Richard nodded quickly, still unable to lift his gaze to meet anyone's. The arrogance and self-assurance he once had were completely gone, replaced by deep shame and regret. He knew that this was the decisive moment, a major turning point for him to truly change his attitude and way of life. The atmosphere in the store began to soften a little. The initial tension gave way to a sense of relief and a small, hopeful belief that change and progress were always possible, even for those who seemed beyond it. Sarah looked at Michael, their eyes meeting gently but with deep meaning. They both understood that today justice had been protected, but the fight against racism and injustice would be long. However, at least for now, they had achieved a small but incredibly important victory on the long road ahead. As Sarah and Michael walked out of Elegance Boutique, Sarah holding the precious vintage watch, a gift she had chosen with all her heart for her husband, the atmosphere in the store remained thick with emotion and tension. Inside, no one dared to speak another word. They simply stood in silence, watching the couple walk away, their figures slowly fading into the distance on the sunlit rodeo drive. However, the story didn't end there. The moment Sarah stepped out of the store, the events that had just unfolded began to spread like wildfire. The customers who had witnessed everything quickly shared what they had seen on social media, detailing every part of the story. Richard's blatant racism, Ashley's careless arrogance, and Michael Johnson's powerful yet just presence. Someone who defended justice not only for his wife, but for everyone who had been discriminated against like Sarah. Within just a few hours, the incident at Elegance Boutique became a hot topic across social media platforms, online forums, and real-life conversations. The story quickly spread beyond Rodeo Drive, creeping into every corner of Los Angeles, and eventually sweeping across the country. In particular, the video capturing the moment Michael confronted Richard and forced him to publicly apologize to Sarah in front of everyone was shared rapidly, attracting millions of views and comments from online communities. Many expressed deep outrage and disappointment at Richard and the store staff's racist behavior, while others strongly praised Michael Johnson's decisive and principled actions. It wasn't long before major media outlets joined in. The story appeared in top newspapers, on news programs, and in popular talk shows, all discussing the issue of racism in modern society. Elegance Boutique, once a symbol of luxury and exclusivity, had now become the focal point of sharp criticism and public debates on business ethics and social responsibility. As for Richard and Ashley, their lives immediately plunged into an unprecedented turmoil. The harsh criticism from the public felt like sharp knives, making them acutely aware of the heavy burden of the consequences of their thoughtless actions. Richard realized that the reputation he had spent years building had crumbled in an instant. Now, not only he, but the entire Elegance Boutique and everyone involved would have to face a stain that would not easily be erased. More importantly, the powerful message from this story had been conveyed clearly, strongly, and deeply. Everyone who witnessed or learned about the incident realized that racism and judging others based on appearance are never acceptable. Every person deserves respect and fair treatment, regardless of who they are, what they wear, or what color their skin is. At a small cafe in downtown Los Angeles, Sarah and Michael sat quietly together, watching the passers-by outside the window. They didn't speak much, but each of them understood that they had just made a significant, impactful mark that would help change the perception of many people. Sarah gently smiled at Michael and softly said, "I really hope that what happened today helps people understand the true value of fairness and respect." Michael squeezed her hand gently, his eyes full of trust and pride. "I'm sure it will, Sarah. Sometimes the greatest lessons come from situations that seem small." They sat there, filled with the belief that today's story wouldn't stop here. It would continue to spread, inspire, and remind everyone that in any circumstance, human dignity is the most valuable thing, and no one has the right to violate that sacredness. After the storm and tension that had just unfolded, Sarah and Michael finally found peace in the familiar setting of their small restaurant, the one they often frequented. The soft afternoon sunlight filtered through the window curtains, creating a warm, relaxing atmosphere, as if to dispel the lingering, heavy emotions. Sarah sat quietly, sipping a warm cup of tea, feeling the gentle warmth spread through her hands. She smiled faintly as she reflected on all that had just transpired, from the moment she was publicly insulted to the moment she stood proudly beside the man she loved and trusted. It had certainly been a difficult journey, but in the end, it helped her understand more than ever the true value every person deserves. Michael watched her closely, his eyes gentle, full of love and appreciation. He gently took Sarah's hand, squeezing it softly as if to convey all his sincere feelings. His voice came out soft, but it carried strength and a deep message he wanted to affirm, once again, clearly and powerfully. Sarah, you know, the greatest value of a person isn't found in the lavish stores or the expensive clothes they wear. It's found in their character, kindness, and most importantly, how we treat each other. And today, you helped everyone realize that. Sarah smiled softly, her eyes filled with gratitude and deep emotion at Michael's words. She understood that, though it was just a small story, it had helped awaken many people, making them realize the importance of respect and fairness in how we treat one another, no matter who they are, where they come from, or how they look. In that small, familiar restaurant, the two of them sat together, quietly enjoying the gentle happiness after having gone through a great trial. Around them, the other customers, though not fully aware of the story, seemed to feel the peace and special strength radiating from the couple. Out there, the story continued to spread, continuing to create strong waves in the community. But most importantly, it had planted in everyone's heart a powerful belief in the values of justice, kindness, and human dignity. Values that must always be protected and cherished, no matter the circumstances. And perhaps Sarah and Michael's story will not stop here. It will continue to spread, continue to inspire many people, and continue to remind each of us that the greatest power to change the world is kindness, tolerance, and an unwavering belief in the goodness of every human being. If this story touched your heart, share it and spread it to those around you. What do you think of this story? Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar? Leave a comment below so we can listen and share together. And always remember, in a society full of prejudice, it is kindness, fairness, and human dignity that are the values capable of changing the world and making a difference.